gun rights group files a brief in the Texas abortion case, and an interview with Hollywood armorer Steve Wolf. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
I made the devil run. I gave him poison just for fun.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also the founder of thereload.com, where you can go over and buy yourself a membership today if you want to get this podcast a day early and you want to get exclusive access to dozens of posts on the website, stories and analysis pieces from people like me and our contributing writer, Jake Fogelman, who is here today with me. Hi, Jake. How are you?
Doing well. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing okay. I'm getting over a little bit of a cold. Actually, I think you are too.
Yeah.
Cold season is upon us.
Tis the season.
We both took COVID tests and they're negative. So all the mitigation does not work against the cold, it seems like. We haven't gotten COVID, but we both got the cold, even though you're in Colorado and I'm here in Virginia. So it's just that time of the year, unfortunately, for our voices.
Yeah.
Or maybe fortunately for our voices, I think maybe you get a little bit throatier and deeper sound.
Yeah.
That might be beneficial for the podcast.
Good mic voice. Yeah.
Maybe we should get colds all the time. And maybe that will make our podcast ratings go up. By the way, people, you should be reviewing and rating this show if you want to help us grow. So that's something that you can personally do to help this channel, this podcast, do better and reach more people. If you're so inclined, if you enjoy what we're doing here, let us know. Give us a review, leave a comment on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe on your app for your favorite podcasting app, all that stuff. But anyway, let's jump into the news of the week. First up, we have a piece from you, Jake, that describes something that I actually had kind of predicted would happen back when the Texas abortion law was passed, a few months back now, I guess,
Yep.
where the thing that's interesting about that law is not necessarily the actual, politics of abortion, whenever you come down on that, it's the enforcement mechanism that they used. Is a novel idea, very creative, I guess is one way of putting it, right? Which is to use essentially civil cases to enforce a ban on most abortions.
That's right.
Basically make the practitioners, the abortionists, liable civilly for performing abortions in most circumstances. And so that is actually enforced not by the government. You don't get charged in criminal court for performing an abortion. You would get charged in a civil court by a private actor. So just a regular person. Right. And that was the sort of unique thing about this law that made it very difficult to stop in a pre-enforcement, time that, after it passed, but before it was actually put into effect. Courts they basically couldn't block it because of this enforcement mechanism, because it's the way that they went about doing this. And so at this time, I wrote essentially that this was likely to be used by gun control activists as well in other parts of the country, trying to go after gun rights, maybe banning the sale of guns in the same manner, making people civilly liable for selling guns or certain kinds of guns or, whatever it might be. But that core tactic, I think, could easily be exported to those issues by people who are equally dedicated to pursuing the, outlawing of firearms ownership, or at least some firearms ownership, in the same way that Texas legislators are committed to pursuing outlawing abortion in a lot of circumstances. So now the latest is that this case against the abortion law in Texas has made it to the Supreme Court now. Initially, they rejected intervening because of this tactic, but now the case has made it back up there. And there's an interesting brief that came along. Can you tell us a little bit about who filed it and why?
Sure. Yeah. So the Firearms Policy Coalition, for those of you who don't know, is a national gun rights group known for suing against gun control laws and things that they think are against the Second Amendment. Well, in this case, they filed an amicus brief for this case, the Whole Women's Health versus Jackson, basically arguing that the court should take the case and grant review, which, as you mentioned, they have since decided they're going to hear the case. Actually, the first day of the session, November 1st, they're going to hear the case. But yeah, they basically laid out the argument that you laid out in your analysis piece, basically saying, hey, if this law is allowed to stand, what's to stop other parties from passing similar laws for guns or for any other constitutional right that's been previously recognized by the court, to just say, hey, the government's not going to enforce it. We're going to kick this to private actors to sue in court. So we're not going to levy any civil fines or threaten you with jail time. So you can't say the harm was done by a government actor.
Right.
And then thus the law is allowed to stand. So basically, like FPC made that argument in the case. And yeah, so we'll see how it plays out when the court hears the case.
Yeah. And the idea there is that basically it's much harder for a court to enjoin essentially every resident of Texas than it is to enjoin the Attorney General of Texas or, whoever might bring a government case against an abortion provider. And so in the same vein, if California or Hawaii or New York or a state that has a tendency to pass very strict gun laws that have their constitutionality questioned on a regular basis, right? I mean, New York's also going to be here. The subject of a Supreme Court challenge this term over their gun carry laws. But a place like that could certainly try to push the boundaries in the same way on guns, where they could, outlaw the sale of all, AR-15s in the state via this novel enforcement mechanism where, they empower civilians to go and sue gun dealers or gun manufacturers in civil court. You've kind of seen that tactic tried to some degree already in regards to liability for criminal use of guns. The states have tried to sue gun manufacturers for criminal use of guns by third parties, often decades after the gun was initially sold. And so instead of trying to do that through, a government agency, the Attorney General, right? I mean, New Jersey is currently pursuing this exact kind of lawsuit in the case against Smith & Wesson over claims that its advertising was violated New Jersey state law, and therefore the federal law that protects gun makers from this sort of liability doesn't apply in this case. But, you could certainly see them instead, if that case doesn't work out, if that argument doesn't work out, and I think it's more likely than not that Smith & Wesson will end up winning that case, you could see certainly them turning to this sort of enforcement mechanism instead, and just letting anyone in New Jersey sue Smith & Wesson in civil court for selling any kind of gun that they don't approve of, and or any gun at all, really. I mean, you could go that far.
Which is more fitting for New Jersey. Right.
I mean, you could see that as someone attempting that and then having the same sort of pre-enforcement blocks that you see with a lot of other kinds of laws not being able to be put in place here by a court because of this tactic. Because a court can't enjoin all of the residents of New Jersey or all of the residents of Texas or California against suits. It can only really do it on as cases come up, right? That's sort of the main issue with trying to go about blocking these types of laws pending judicial review. You have to have standing in order to initiate a case like that. And it's much harder to do when before you have sort of a test case come up because it's just more difficult for a court to issue that broad of a preliminary injunction against enforcement of a law like this. So anyway, that's the sort of dilemma here. And obviously, if you're staunchly pro-life, you support what Texas is trying to accomplish. You can make an argument for using these sorts of novel and extreme, maybe, I don't know, tactics legally, legal tactics. But everyone should be aware that it's not going to stop at that issue. And I guess that's what FPC's point is here, that they don't want to see this tactic used again against the issue that they value, which is obviously gun rights. And so that's why they want the court to kind of nip this in the bud and not open up the door to more of these kinds of laws on a variety of different other issues.
That's exactly right. Yep.
So we'll see how that goes, but it's certainly interesting development to watch. And that Supreme Court case, I think, is going to have repercussions well beyond just the abortion debate. But
yeah.
The other thing that we're following this week is failed ATF nominee, David Chipman, which he was on CBS Evening News, right? Just on Wednesday, I believe it was.
Yep.
Yeah. And
sat down with Nora O'Donnell. Mm-hmm.
And he made a number of claims on there that are pretty hyperbolic, I guess, would be one way of,
to say the least,
of putting it. Yeah. Well, I mean, first off, I guess one of the first things that I would want to say about this is, like, Nora O'Donnell, just like the New York Times, who was the first one to interview Chipman after his nomination failed, did not ask him a single question about the allegations that he, one, made racist comments while working in the Detroit office, where he is accused of saying that too many black people had passed a promotion assessment and that they must have cheated in order to do so. And then obviously we broke the story that there were, there was a complaint filed against him over those comments, allegedly. And we were able to corroborate that story is one that ATF agents had certainly been told at the time happened. So that occurred in July. And then in August, we had a black former ATF agent, come forward and tell us that Chipman had actually specifically accused him of cheating on a promotion assessment because Chipman believed that his answers were too good on the particular segment that he was sitting in on. So obviously these are pretty serious revelations and pretty serious accusations that got a lot of attention in his nomination fight when they came out. In fact, they prompted the entire Republican caucus of the Senate Judiciary Committee to call for a second hearing. They prompted the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell to call for him to be pulled. And then eventually he was pulled by President Biden a few weeks later after failing to get support from a number of key Democratic holdouts. Now, I mean, the entire Republican caucus publicly said they would not vote for him. But then you also had 4 big holdouts on the Democratic side as well, who never publicly supported him, never publicly declared their support for him in, what was it? Who were the 4? It was
it's a Manchin.
Yeah, Manchin, Sinema,
Angus King,
and Tester.
Tester, yeah.
So they were the real roadblocks. Is you only need 50 votes in order to get a nominee confirmed in this to a position like that. So obviously Republican support was unanimous, but they didn't actually need any Republicans to get him through and confirm him.
That's right.
But O'Donnell doesn't mention any of this in her interview with him. She doesn't question him once about any of these allegations. He has responded to them in a USA Today interview that happened a few weeks ago as well with the Trace, where they did directly ask him about this. And he claimed that, well, one, he confirmed that it was a black agent that he accused of cheating. And he denied that that had anything to do with, racial animus. He said that obviously that his claim is that that had no part. Now, the agent himself believes that it did play a role.
Sure.
That it played a direct role and the main role in what happened to him. And the agent said he was exonerated of what Shipman accused him of, but that at the same time, it took 2 years to go through that investigation and effectively sidelined him during that time. And he lost his desire to pursue further promotion in the agency after that. So it did have a serious effect on this agent's career. It's a fairly significant story, and it's remarkable to me personally that you could have someone like that who's based those allegations on a network news show and not even ask him once about them. Instead, she focused on his opinion on basically rising murder rates in the United States and his opinion on his own confirmation failing. Is a little bit odd,
and
to be honest.
it is odd. And the fact that she doesn't bring it up, and like you said, the New York Times didn't either, it allows him to make some of those hyperbolic claims that you were talking about, where he says, oh, I'm for gun safety, and the fact that they were against me means they're against gun safety.
Well, actually, it was worse than that. He said, he spent his whole career at the ATF and then 10 years afterwards where he was working directly for gun control organizations, which he still does. He works for Giffords as a senior policy analyst today. But he was saying that his whole career was dedicated to stopping gun violence, and that the only reason to oppose him would be if you don't support stopping gun violence.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Yeah, it's a pretty rash thing to say about your opponents, but that was his claim as to why he didn't succeed in his nomination. But I just think it's a bit odd to have him on to opine about guns in America. He failed. Like, his nomination didn't go through. It's kind of weird to have him on, and they kind of treated him like he was the director of the ATF.
Right.
Like, not that Nora O'Donnell never challenges him on anything, because she does in what's available online, but at the same time, she's like asking him what the purpose of the ATF is and what should be done at the ATF. It's kind of treating him like he is the ATF director, even though he's obviously not. And the other thing is that, in addition to the reporting on the racism allegations, we also had direct quotes from current and former ATF agents who were concerned about his nomination. Now, Chipman paints this opposition to him as purely being a political and purely being the result of the gun industry, when really there were also the same concerns inside the ATF. People said that because he's so antagonistic towards the gun industry, which he would be set up to regulate, that could harm the agency's ability to pursue criminal investigations, because oftentimes gun dealers are the ones who help to provide tips for those investigations. That the kind of cooperation between the industry and the agency, that kind of cooperation is key to how they actually perform their jobs, and that he would risk that. So this was a common theme that you heard from multiple agents. I think we spoke directly to 4 agents who all had the same concern. And then another 7 agents, former agents, came out and wrote a public letter stating the same concerns. Yep. That was submitted to the Judiciary Committee as well. Nora O'Donnell did not ask him about those concerns at all. And I just find that odd as well. Like, she's set up in this interview like he represents the ATF, even though he was not confirmed to be director. And every public statement from a former ATF official during his confirmation his confirmation period was negative towards him, was opposed to his nomination. So like, I don't know how you could make it the case that he speaks for the ATF in any way. He hasn't worked there in over a decade. And even people who worked directly with him said that they were concerned about him becoming director. So it's just an odd, sloppy interview, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And obviously he goes on to make a number of other very controversial statements that sort of give you insight into why he was a controversial nominee even before the allegations of racism came out. Right.
Right. He says the gun industry profits off death and violence, and, he's exactly the kind of things that they were concerned with.
Right.
Going forward.
He says that they intentionally sell guns to criminals and terrorists and profit off of that. And that's why there's opposition to what he wants to do. That was his explanation for it. And he also claimed that it's easier to buy a gun in most of the country than it is to buy a beer, which is just, and he claimed this without any evidence or explanation of how he could possibly say that, because it's not remotely true. Even in areas like, usually, this is a common talking point that you hear, obviously, in gun control circles. President Obama made this a number of times. I think even Biden has done this too.
He has, yeah.
But the claim is, they're usually trying to say, like, in bad neighborhoods, you can go and buy a gun off the street easily. And that may be true, but generally, but that would be illegal for one.
Sure.
In most of the circumstances that they're talking about here. Like, if you're buying a gun from a street dealer who's not doing a background check, it's probably illegal. Yes, you can buy a gun through a private sale that's legal without a background check in most states. Okay, fair enough. But like, you don't need a background check to buy a beer either.
I was going to say, never had to fill out a 4473 at the bar.
And if you're talking about illegal sales, like, I'm pretty sure you could get a beer. That's like one of the classic things, is to have an adult go and buy you a beer if you're underage.
Right.
Like, that's not, so it's just like they make these bizarre comparisons. I mean, they'll talk about a book. I think President Obama famously said it was easier to get a gun than a book in some parts of the country. It's like, no, it's not. This is just gibberish.
It's actually not.
You're just lying. Same thing here. Like, no, it is not easier to buy a gun than it is to buy a beer, whatever your made up circumstances are going to be. It's just not true in any way. Like, how hard do you think it is to get a beer in the United States? It's just ridiculous. So I don't know.
It just shows the deficiency in covering firearms issues in the mainstream media, which is, exactly why you guys should stay tuned to The Reload. Come for that kind of insight.
Yes. Good sell. That's good. You're learning. But yeah, I mean, it's just like, come on, man. And she challenges him on some of his more hyperbolic statements. When he talks about how opposition to him is all because gun dealers want to sell guns to criminals and terrorists, she asks or presses him and is like, you really think that lawful gun owners don't want to stop, gun traffickers? And he says, not enough of them. He's attacking directly lawful gun owners, saying that they don't care about gun crime, which is remarkable. He's like explicitly attacking Angus King and the other Democrats who didn't vote for him because he claims that they were concerned he wouldn't be friendly enough towards the gun industry. It was sort of the way that he put it, like implying that they're all beholden to the gun industry. And that again that's where Norah O'Donnell should have mentioned. It's not just Angus King or, Republican senators or Tester or Manchin or Sinema who had these concerns about him and his relationship with the gun industry. Other ATF agents had these concerns, like we noted. So it wasn't a well-prepared interview. It didn't cover really serious allegations of wrongdoing against him. And I just don't, to me, I can't imagine that happening with a Trump nominee or a Bush nominee accused of the same things. It's not realistic that they would get a relatively softball interview on the nightly news or the evening news, in this case, on CBS. Right. So I just think it's disappointing. It's not the worst interview I've ever seen, but it's certainly not up to the standards of what professional journalism should be, what you should strive to do when you have, like, I can't interview Chip and they will not let me interview him. I would love to have him on this very podcast, uncut, unedited, let him say whatever he wants, and let me ask him questions. I'd love to do that, but that's not going to happen because they won't make him available. And so people who do get interviews with him ought to take their responsibility seriously to the public to inform them and to get answers about what's happening. I mean, USA Today and the Trace, to their credit, asked him about this stuff. They only put in 2 sentences from him on it, but at least they asked him.
At least they asked, yeah.
I think more could be said. There could be a deeper inquiry than just asking him and printing that he said the race wasn't involved. I mean, there's a lot of questions you could ask in there about the situation, but a lot of these places don't even do it, and they're just having him do this media tour. It's like his 4th major outlet now. I'm sure he'll probably be on more. It feels like a rehabilitation tour. Or a spite tour at this point. Like, how hard he's going against Biden administration and these Democrats in the Senate is kind of surprising, given that he's still, associated with a major gun control group. I wonder how long that goes on before they start getting pushback about it.
Sure.
But, we'll see. Anyway, the other big news of the week, obviously, has been the Alec Baldwin shooting. And so I've actually been able to book the other sort of expert who's been doing TV appearances to talk about this. Is I've done Entertainment Tonight and Cheddar and Fox and a number of other platforms talking about this case and what happened and how it could happen and what should be done about it. But Steve Wolf is a Hollywood armorer who has also been doing a lot of the same media interviews that I have. And I thought, he'd be a good guy to have on and talk a little bit more in depth about what went on there. And so that's who we have up next here on the podcast. So stay tuned. All right, I'm here with Steve Wolf to discuss the Alec Baldwin shooting, the latest developments in that, and some of the actual techniques used on movie and TV sets for overseeing firearms, because Steve has experience with that. So I wanted to bring on somebody who can actually speak to it from experience. Steve, can you give us just a little bit of background about yourself for the audience?
Sure, Stephen. I've been doing movie stunts and special effects since the late 80s, working initially as a set medic, seeing all the ways that people could get hurt. And then as I transitioned into stunt coordinating and special effects coordinating, I never forgot people really do get hurt doing this stuff. So you have to work with a constant eye towards safety. But I've worked with Tom Cruise, James Cameron, Robert De Niro, David Duchovny. I've gotten a chance to work with, really all the people that I really looked up to in the business and still do. And, try to carry on the tradition of professionalism that I learned from them in their side of it and bring that to what I do on my side of it. And that's, constant vigilance.
Mm-hmm. And you've obviously been one of the top experts that a lot of media outlets have gone to, other than myself. Actually, I feel like the two of us have done most of these, gun expert hits so far.
Yeah, true.
So it's kind of great to have you on here so we can talk about it maybe a little bit more in depth than what we can do on, a 10-minute hit on or 5-minute hit on Fox or right. Entertainment Tonight or whatever. Because I want to get a little more into how do these safety protocols really work on set versus how they would at a range. Right. Yeah. Where, I have a little more experience as a firearms safety instructor on the range side of things. You have some more experience on the set side. And then we can just talk about what went wrong.
Several ranges.
Right.
And, there's always someone there watching what's going on.
Yep. The range safety officer.
And it's
right?
supposed to be even higher safety ratio on a movie set where you're supposed to have like one armorer watching one guy with the gun.
Yep.
How did this break down? Where was the armorer?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, right? How did this break down? I think for me, the number one thing, right? I mean, for me, it's like there were multiple mistakes across multiple people that led to something like this happening. It wasn't just one thing to get to this sort of catastrophic mistake where somebody's life is taken on a movie set by what should be a safe use of firearms that's overseen on multiple levels. You got to have multiple mistakes. It's not just one thing that one person did.
Yeah, you have this chain of broken links.
Right.
The thing is that the chain starts at the top with the producer, which was Alec Baldwin, and it ends at the bottom with the person who had the gun in their hands, which was Alec Baldwin.
Right.
So there's no escaping blame there, but he needn't worry that he won't get any. There's enough for everyone.
Yeah, that's my take on it too. Like, obviously, he's the one who pulled the trigger. He's the one who didn't check the gun himself to see if it was clear. He's the one who was pointing it in the direction of crew. Now, again, all of those things can only happen in a scenario on set where other people are also making mistakes, like allowing a shot to take place where a gun is pointed at a crew member, loading the wrong ammunition into the gun, not checking the gun when you're handed it to give to Alec Baldwin, right, the assistant director, and the just general lack of safety in allowing live ammunition on set in the first place.
Right. Would anyone say that the movie was any worse if I used this gun or this gun?
Right.
Would that affect how many people came and paid to watch that movie or how many people streamed the movie? I don't think so, right? But this one is actually manufactured as a prop gun. Mm-hmm. And if you try to put live ammo into it, you don't get very far because it won't accept it. The length of this cartridge is too great for the modified cylinder, and you can't fit it in there.
Right.
So would they say, oh, we can't use that gun, it doesn't look real? What, because this one looks more real? This one actually is a live one. And, you can take live ammo, you can put it in there, and then you can shoot and kill someone with it. Or even kill one person and injure another person.
Right.
So, I would think in any case where a prop gun or a modified gun can be used, it should be. But to say that, real guns can't be used safely on set really isn't true either, because they're used on set all the time, hundreds of times a week. I'm sure people are filming with real guns and no one gets hurt because they have someone there who knows what they're doing and because they don't bring live ammo on the set.
Yeah.
So you have to make so many mistakes, right? You have to be using an unnecessarily risky gun. You have to be using live ammo on the set, and you have to point the gun at somebody. And if you don't make any one of those mistakes, you don't have an accident.
Yeah.
You might scare people, if you have live gun, live ammo, and you point it off camera and shoot it. Pretty irresponsible, but nobody dies.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's why gun safety rules are designed to be redundant, right?
Yeah,
that's the whole idea.
And simple, right? So, and for Alec Baldwin to say, "Oh, I'm not an expert. I'm just an actor." 5-year-olds can learn these rules, and if if Robert De Niro can learn how to box, so he could do Raging Bull, and Tom Cruise can rappel off of a building and in Saudi Arabia, and he learns how to do that. There's no reason that if you're playing a cowboy in a Western movie that you can't learn how to use the firearms properly. I just don't buy it. When Alec Baldwin drives to the set, he operates a motor vehicle, right? So what are the control inputs there? A steering wheel, a gear shift, a turn signal, a wiper indicator, an air conditioner thing, right? 20 different controls that he learned to use to drive his car. But he can't learn to use the single control on a gun, the trigger. It's the only piece that you have to give input to shoot. So there's really no reason that anyone can't have the amount of expertise in firearm safety to be able to look at a gun and know, is there live ammo in there? Is it loaded? Right.
Yeah. And that's my take on it as well, in terms of Alec Baldwin's personal level of negligence in this incident. Movie sets seem to be a little bit different, right, than the range, because because they're supposed to be somebody responsible professionally for everything that happens with the firearm on set, the armorer, right?
Right.
And you're supposed to have these several different layers of safety involved with how shots are set up. And an actor is told to do something a certain way. Maybe the person telling them to do it that way is also responsible when it comes to pointing a gun at crew. But at the end of the day, anyone who's handling a firearm on set should know how to safely handle it. They should know how to check it. They should know what it looks like when it's clear or not.
Anyone handling a firearm anywhere should know how to handle it safely.
Right.
But especially on set, because it's an occupational environment.
Mm-hmm.
If I go down to my basement and I hire, and I handle my guns unsafely, so I blow a hole in my water heater or something. Not the end of the world. It's stupid, but not fatal. But if I'm in a professional working environment, then the maximum level of safety is what should be followed, not the minimum level of complacency.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the latest reporting that we've seen and what we've seen in the warrant applications for search warrants involved with this case, it sounds like what happened was they were using live ammunition on the set. Obviously live ammunition was mixed in, which again, we've established is probably the top mistake in all of this, that live ammunition was ever
not mistake. Mistake is when you're calculating the tip at the restaurant and you forget to carry the one. Okay, this is an act of overt stupidity.
Yes, certainly. But it sounds as though the scene was set up to be using dummy ammunition, right? So there's three main types of ammunition, right, in this circumstance here. You got live ammunition, which is a fully live round that has the shell casing, the primer, the gunpowder, and the bullet, the projectile, all in one. And that's your, when you go to the range and you shoot ammunition, that's live ammunition that you're shooting.
Right.
Then you have blanks, which you have an example of, live and blanks over there on your side of things. But blanks are basically live ammunition with the bullet removed. There's no projectile.
Right. 3 out of 4 parts: primer, powder, and casing, but no bullet. Right,
and that's used to simulate what gunfire looks like visibly on camera, right?
Right.
Because there are other ways that you can do that with airsoft guns and CGI. And maybe that's appropriate in certain circumstances. Maybe it doesn't look as good on camera, or it's more expensive, and that's why you still have a lot of people using.
It doesn't look like anything on camera because you don't see it on camera.
Right.
It happens.
But maybe the CGI doesn't really match up to what a blank can give you.
It matches up close enough that, if we can suspend disbelief for all the other things that are happening in a movie, we could do the same thing for the muzzle blast.
Sure. But the third type is a dummy round, right? And so a dummy round
right here.
Yeah. That's where you have a shell casing and you have a bullet, the projectile, but you don't have any gunpowder in there. So it can't fire. That's the idea. Right. And you use that because if you're doing a shot, especially with a revolver, like the one that you have there, the two that you have there, if you were to point a camera down the barrel of that revolver and you didn't have a dummy round, and if you had blanks in there, it would look weird. It would look different.
Right. You're looking to see a bunch of these there. You're looking to see bullets down there.
Right.
Not blank air.
And that's why they use those.
Right.
For the visual effect. Now, it sounds like, from what what's been reported, what the police have said, that the gun was loaded with dummy rounds and a live round. And that's where you get to the point where it's harder to tell those two apart than it is a blank and a live round, except that there should be visible indicators of a dummy round, like the removal of the primer or a dimpled primer.
Yeah,
it should be easy to tell if you know what you're looking for.
Right. So I often use a spent primer, and it looks different.
Right. And
now,
so when you're
a spent primer, could have been the result of a misfire that on a second tap would then go off.
True.
So it's better to have no primer.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess that gets into one point that I wanted to discuss a little bit with you about, I guess, standards on movie sets when it comes to armors and things like dummy rounds. Because I know with the Brandon Lee shooting, back in the 90s, one of the explanations for how that happened was that the armorer on set made their own custom dummy rounds. Is that how it usually works?
And then how does that work? Out, the bullet stayed there. And then they loaded a blank behind it, and then the blank fired the bullet.
Right. And so you could see how that could happen. But I'm wondering, like, dummy rounds, do you usually buy those or do you make them yourself? Because it sounds like people kind of make them themselves. Yeah.
You knock the primer out. I mean, you start with live ammo, you shoot it off, then you knock out the primer, and then you seat a bullet in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You put BBs in it so that when you shake it, those are the dummy rounds.
Okay. So you can have an audio, like an audible difference too.
Audible confirmation. You shake it, you hear the BBs bouncing around, there's no gunpowder in there, and there's no primer.
Right. And I guess that leads me to like wonder about the standards for this kind of thing. In that, like, if everybody's making their own dummy rounds, it's just like reloads, right? Where you don't necessarily know if it's quality reloads that you're getting. Right. And in this case, maybe the dummy rounds weren't marked very well. And so it wasn't that easy to tell the difference because you got a new armorer, 24 years old, only her second movie from what's been reported. Right. Maybe that also contributed to what happened here.
Yeah, well, if you can't tell the difference between the dummy rounds and the live rounds, maybe you should assume that they're live rounds.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this goes back to the idea of, like, so many things had to have been done wrong for this to happen that it's really kind of astounding. Yeah.
It's a comedy of tragedies without the comedy.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And so I think one thing I wanted to get at here is some things that I've seen in terms of people, discussing how actors should really interact with firearms. So there's a video of another armorer who does some Western style TVs and movie that he's had experience working with firearms on, and he was talking about how it's similar to stunt work, right? And you've also done stunt work.
Done a lot of stunt work, yeah.
Right? And so he was comparing this idea of having the actor personally check the chamber of a revolver for the rounds and having them, manipulate the rounds, take them out, put them back in, make sure that they're actually what they're supposed to be. That could cause problems too. It'd be similar in this person's analogy to an actor checking their own stunt rigging and potentially screwing it up. What do you think about that argument in this case?
I think all of this is physics, and physics can be broken down in pretty simple terms. If the stunt rigging means that the buckles are supposed to be set thusly, then you tell the actor, I'm setting your buckle thusly, and you know that it's safe because the webbing is covering the red, part of the carabiner that tells us that it's properly looped through. And then the actor could look, and then they could know that they're safe, and they would feel comfortable. Right. And there's no reason not to share that knowledge. You're not worried that the actors, once they have that knowledge, they're going to steal your job or something. You're just explaining what you're doing. You're showing them that you know what you're doing, and you're letting them share in the safety process. So that, let's say you put the harness on wrong, if you've taught the actor what it's supposed to look like, the actor could then look down and say, hey, Charlie, didn't you tell me that the red was supposed to be covered on here? Because it doesn't look like it to me. You're the expert. You come look. But I'm just, it just doesn't look like what you taught me was supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Right? The more you share that knowledge, right, the more people can participate in the safety process.
And this is what I thought about. That was kind of mirrors my thoughts on the this particular critique. Like, I understand, this person was saying, all right, well, we're only loading in rounds in the certain way, so we might need a one blank and then 4 dummy rounds in order for this particular shot, because we only want him to take as many shots. Like, this is a very controlled situation. It's supposed to.
That's right.
And so we're only using this kind of, and we don't want to mix. We don't want to have the actor mix them around or whatever. Right. But it seemed to me like, all right, that makes sense. But then why not have why isn't the armorer there to?
So we load everything up in the right order, and then based on that order, this one here should be in this round should be in this position, right? So we put that in there. We make a little mark on the back of that. That way, if the actor handles it, if they want to look at it, they want to check it themselves, then we make sure that the right one ended up back in the right spot before we go.
Yeah, so it doesn't seem like that big of a hurdle.
Yeah, no. There's no big hurdles in gun safety, which is really why, even though when these accidents happen, they are a tragedy, they don't happen all that often. relative to the amount of, gun usage that happens on sets.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's, there's like dozens of movies and film, TV shot every day in this country that utilizes firearms in one way or another.
The vast majority are done completely safely.
Yeah. I mean, I'm only aware personally from what I've, read since this news broke of 3 fatal accidents over the last, 40 years. There was the
Sean Hexum, Brandon Lee.
In 84, Brandon Lee. And then this is the third one, right?
And this is the third, right. There have been others.
Now, there's been others in other parts of the country.
He just had his ear shot off with a blank. There's a gentleman in Kansas City that had his face shot with a live shotgun during a Western reenactment, earlier this year, because they used a live shotgun shells instead of blanks. So these things happen, occasionally, but for the amount of filming that's done that uses firearms, it's a rarity. And it's a rarity because you have to achieve such a high level of stupidity and carelessness that most people just can't get there.
Yeah. And I guess to that point, I think we should discuss a little more about how they got to that point on this particular set, or at least from what we can glean from what's been reported thus far. And it sounds a lot like it perhaps had to do with budget constraints and rushing production.
This is a $6 million movie. Mm-hmm. So how much more would it have cost to hire someone with a little bit more experience and to make sure that they had prop guns instead of real guns?
Right.
Not much,
Yeah, presumably it's not
minor budgetary change to the cost of a life lost, and it's pretty foolish.
Yeah, absolutely. But it sounds like this production. I mean, obviously they hired a green armorer. Right. We know that much. Well, they hired. Now she had her father had worked in the industry, but this was only her
father.
Second.
Del Reed is a real mensch and knows his stuff and has been doing this forever and has a perfect safety record.
Mm-hmm. Well, perhaps he should have also been hired alongside her.
He should have been there. Honestly, I mean, everyone has to start somewhere in the business, right?
Sure.
We all have our first gig, but you should have the first time that you have all the responsibility should be after you've apprenticed under somebody for several years who's really taught you the ropes properly. And, that what they know, that what you're doing when you take that first job.
Yeah. And then, I guess alongside that, so, in your experience, from what I've heard reported, there's a possibility that maybe she was the only one on set who had the responsibility for the guns, and maybe there's some suggestion that there should have been she should have had assistant or something like that involved. What does that look like normally?
She should have had an assistant. More likely, she should have had a supervisor. Someone who'd been doing it a lot longer than she had, and she could have been the assistant. But someone there who's watching every step of what happens, making sure that she understands the rules, and make sure that she's comfortable enforcing them. If you get a newbie on set, they're kind of timid and they're just so happy to have the job. And then you have some kind of a bully AD, like, come on, let's go. Let's get those guns out here. I got to get this shot. I got 6 more minutes of light. What are you holding me up for? And it's like, hey, wait a minute, dude. Okay. Copernicus could have predicted 400 years ago what time sunset was going to be tonight. If you didn't account for that, that's your problem. I'm not going to rush the safety process here. I'm not going to endanger anyone. And if you feel that way, maybe you're the one who shouldn't be working here.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot, it takes some balls to talk back to an AD like that when you're afraid that you're going to get fired and they're just going to bring in somebody else.
Yeah, and you see that all over the place, right? In accidents, when accidents happen, whether it's with guns or even something like airplane crashes, right? I watch a lot of
space shuttle, right? How many people knew that there was something wrong with the O-rings, and nobody said anything, and then they send it up and it blows up in their face and people die.
Right. And
so
I remember
has an obligation, to speak up for safety.
Yeah.
If anyone doesn't think that something is safe, they have a right to raise their hand and, get that concern voiced and addressed.
Yeah, I remember one plane crash where the pilot and the assistant pilot, there's two pilots, but one was more experienced than the other. And the less experienced one noticed something was wrong, but didn't assertively speak up because the more experienced pilot said that it wasn't a problem. And then the plane ended up crashing and everyone died. Yeah. But that sort of dynamic is a problem.
Yeah. No, intimidation through seniority, is no way to promote safety.
Now, what about this report that the assistant director is the one who gave Baldwin the gun and told him it was cold? Is it unusual that the assistant director would be the one handing the gun to an actor and not the armorer themselves? How does that?
It is unusual. Only, the more people you put between the gun and the actor, the less responsibility, and the more fragmented chain of safety you get. Only the armorer should have loaded that gun, and Alex should have been told, if anyone hands you the gun, that's not the armorer, don't take it.
Yeah.
I tell actors that don't take the gun from anyone but me, because I have properly checked it and I know what I'm doing. And not only do I know what I'm doing, but I've made sure that you know what you're doing, right? I know that you know not to take that gun and do anything with it until we've made sure of its condition. And if we're not sure if it's dummies or live rounds in there, then we're just going to take a moment. We're going to unload the 6 cylinders. It's going to be done in 6 seconds. We're going to check those rounds. We're going to shake them. We're going to reload. Oh boy, we cost the production company 30 seconds, but we saved someone's life.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just feel like that's what it boils down to here. It's not that hard to properly carry out gun safety rules on set or at the range. It doesn't take long. Anyone can be trained to do it. There's no good excuse for any of this stuff happening. And there's so many people involved along the line that had to forget what they were supposed to do, or not really forget, but ignore.
Knew.
And it's just
David Halls never should have picked up that gun. He never should have handed it to Alec Baldwin. He certainly shouldn't have yelled cold gun unless he's willing to take the murder rap himself.
Yeah. And Baldwin shouldn't have trusted him on that point, frankly.
No, I mean, he is reported to have had previous on-set safety violations with guns. And honestly, a good AD often doesn't even need to be there. They could be setting up the next shot so the production can move along quickly, right? They're letting everyone know, like, this is what we're doing next, this is what we're doing next, so that the crew can be ready. And they're not supposed to take a minutia hands-on role unless they're trying to expedite things beyond the pace at which they could be done safely.
Yeah, and I also want to know who set up this shot in a way that a gun was pointed at somebody.
Right.
How did that happen? You can have a gun pointed at a camera, right? I mean, in your experience, right? You can have a gun pointed at a camera. Absolutely. I mean, even what you're doing right now. There's no one behind your camera.
Right. If I press this gun, unless the internet is been matured to a point that I'm not aware of,
right?
The only thing in danger is my camera.
Exactly, but there's no one behind your camera when you're doing that. In this case, there were people, at least 2 people behind that camera when he pointed the gun at it, or however it worked out. Like, clearly they were in line of where the gun was pointed. And it's just, how could that ever be set up that way?
Yeah. Guns that fire single bullets are extremely directional. They only endanger the person standing in line with the sights. So if you're lining up a shot where you're doing a cross draw and the camera's pointed, the gun is pointed behind you, and you're sweeping across this whole 180-degree arc, and you're ending up here with a possibility of slight over travel, maybe over here, then you clear this entire side of the set. You put everyone over here. You lock the camera off. You hit record. You step off camera, safe to the safe zone where the gun is never pointed. You get your shot. You come back and turn the camera off.
Yeah.
So I bet you that so many people knew on that set that that's the way you're supposed to do it. But everyone's rushing through, following other people's suggestions who don't know as well as they do. And people are like, you know what? Why even raise my voice? No one's going to listen to me.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a culture problem on that set. I mean, you had the walk off by the union camera people.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if that's connected or not, but it sort of gives you this impression that they're complaining about being rushed. They're complaining about safety conditions of having to work long hours and then drive long distance back to their hotels. It's obviously a very different kind of safety issue, but
that sucks. And it can contribute to fatigue, which can contribute to accidents. But it was not a proximal cause of the accident, right? Nobody got killed because the food was crappy or the drives were long or the hotel beds were too hard.
Right.
You know, they got killed because they pointed a gun at someone that had live ammo in it and pressed the trigger.
Right. I just wonder if it gives some sort of indication about how the production was going and the sort of priorities that they were taking. And
it speaks to a culture of disregard for the health and safety of the crew.
Right. And that's how you end up ultimately with a horrible tragedy like this.
Yeah, people get overworked, they get fatigued, and they lose their safety edge. So when I have to blow up a car in the middle of the night, I look at the production clock and I say, okay, well, you guys are starting at 8. I normally go to bed at midnight. I feel like maybe I have a 2-hour window there. I could blow up this car until 2. But if you're not ready for that shot, I'm not going to do it any later because I'm not comfortable knowing that the further you move me away from my normal sleep pattern, the more likely I am to overlook something and cause an accident. Yeah. So here's your window. You've got between midnight and 2 to get this shot. Otherwise, we're just going to have to do it another time. And if you don't like that answer, you go get somebody else.
Right. And that's sort of the rub too, is like when you're in that position and you're responsible for the safety, you have to stand up for yourself because if you don't, someone could get hurt.
Yeah. You have to stand up for the crew. You have to say, I'm sorry, Dave. I'm sorry, Dave, but what you're proposing is not safe and I won't do it because I don't want to kill anyone. And, then I'm washed up in this business and someone is washed up from their life forever because you didn't get your shot or you wanted to save $50 on not getting the right guns here. You didn't want to pay the FedEx fees from LA to get prop guns sent in. Whatever your problem is, that's your problem. Yeah. But don't make your problem my problem.
Right. And I think
I was hired to make sure that the set is safe.
Yeah.
So don't interfere with my job.
And that's the ultimate tragedy here is that someone lost their life. Somebody who's a mother, a wife, a rising star in the industry from what everyone said. It's a horrifying thing. And I think it's easy to get caught up in like, oh, Alec Baldwin's a big star. A lot of people don't like him. Is he going to face criminal charges? I mean, maybe he will. I don't know. We'll see what happens with that. But the more important thing here is not whether Alec Baldwin, sort of ranking blame for who did what wrong. There were so many people that deserve blame.
Yeah.
Obviously Baldwin's the one who ultimately pulled the trigger and had a gun pointed at somebody, and that ended in someone's life being taken. But what matters more to me when I look at it is the person's life who was taken in this way that was the result of such awful negligence on so many people's part.
Yes, I'm not afraid for either of us to throw around the term gross negligence.
Yeah.
Because the departure from the safety norms was so huge that, negligence is, you made a little mistake. All right. You weren't paying attention. But to get all three of these things wrong and have it end up with someone being killed, gross negligence, wanton disregard for human life.
Right. And so I guess the last thing for you here, what's your takeaway? What do you want to see changed? I know you've talked a little bit about in the past on other interviews about, maybe removing real guns altogether. Some people have started a petition to that. And I'm interested in your thought
I hear
on
27,000 people signed that petition. And that will make anyone safer who's standing behind those 27,000 pages. But otherwise, it's not going to do anything, if people don't follow the rules. And it's not that we need new rules. We need to follow the simple rules that we already have. Mm-hmm. Now, given a choice, when there is the availability, of using a prop gun rather than a real gun, use the prop gun, and if it costs you $200 to have the barrel, the cylinder modified, spend the money. Don't bring live ammo on set and don't point guns at people. When I think, as a firearms instructor, I think, well, if you had a real gun and you loaded it with live ammo and you pointed it at someone and you pressed the trigger and a hole ended up in the person, that everything worked right? That's actually what these guns are designed to do. They're designed to fire projectiles that make holes in people. So if that's what the equipment does in its unmodified format, you have to do everything different. You have to use a modified gun. You have to use modified ammo that we call blanks. You have to not point the guns at people. If you do those things, nobody's going to get hurt.
Yeah. I mean, I think largely the same way. To me, I don't see the necessity of like banning all real guns, especially since this is such a rare event. I mean, it's a horrific event, but it should never be able to happen because people should be following the safety rules. That was the problem here.
That's right. It's, if you have one of the set drivers that drives people back and forth to the hotel, and you kept them up for 24 hours because they've got to spend 5 hours ferrying people to the set and 5 hours at the end of the day ferrying people to the set, and they're exhausted, and they happen to run someone over on a movie set. You're not going to say, we shouldn't allow live cars on set anymore. We're going to say we should ensure the conditions to make sure that everyone has enough sleep, to make sure that the drivers are, have licenses, to make sure that they've received sufficient training, to make sure that the conditions are optimized for them to perform well. But to blame it on a piece of equipment is really putting the responsibility in the wrong place.
Absolutely. But I'm with you as far as, everywhere that it makes sense, try to mitigate the risks. And one of the ways to mitigate risks is using blank firing guns instead of real guns, using airsoft guns and CGI in circumstances where you can, using rubber guns in shots where it's far enough away that you can't tell the difference, but using shooting techniques so that the gun's never pointed at another person, but it looks like it is on camera. There's all kinds of things you can do and should do. But yeah, well, we appreciate you coming on to the show.
So much for having me here.
Yeah, giving us your perspective. I think it's been really interesting.
If your viewers are interested, normally I sell this for quite a lot of money, but I put my entire slide deck for my handgun safety class on my website. It's at stevewolf.info. It's also on my LinkedIn page, and you can download the whole 400 slide presentation that walks people through any of this stuff. And any of your instructors in your audience, you're welcome to download that presentation and use it, because I break it down so simply that it's really hard to get it wrong after you've seen it that way.
Yeah, super important to get that kind of training. And then also, if people are perhaps interested in having you consult for their movie or stunt or whatever, your normal job, hopefully they can contact you through the website as well. Is that right?
Through the website, or just text me. I made my phone number 512-OLD-WOLF because I set my sights on one thing: get old. If you get old, it means you've beat the odds on everything that could have taken you out young.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks for coming on. Maybe we'll have you on again in the future to talk a little bit more about this too.
It's a great service you have here, and a really great podcast.
Thanks. Appreciate it. All right. That's all I've got for you guys this episode. Join me again next week for another one. And if you're in the mood, you go on over to thereload.com and pick out a membership today. We've got monthly, we got yearly, we even have lifetime, although I think that one's going to be pulled off soon here in a little bit. But go ahead and check those out. While they're available, you will get the podcast a day early. You will also get exclusive access to dozens of exclusive pieces of content, including stories that you can't get anywhere else and analysis pieces you can't get anywhere else from me, from Jake, and from others. So head on over there. And if you're so inclined, please take a moment to rate the podcast. Let us know what you think. Let us know how you think we're doing. We try to incorporate any feedback we get to try and improve things. I try not to say as much because of one angry reviewer. It's not easy, though. I'll tell you that much. But go ahead. That helps us a lot to review, to rate this podcast, to get it out to more people. We will be back with you again next week. See you guys then.
I made the devil run. I gave him poison just for fun. I had one friend, now there's none. I made the devil run. I broke so many bones, but none of them were ever my own.